for my notes. Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the Auditor General and her office, who I had a chance to speak with last Thursday, for their work in making our transportation even more accessible. I know how important having a barrier-free transportation system is. On doit avoir un système de transport accessible. Because persons with disabilities already face many obstacles in life, and it's extremely important to me that they do not face more when traveling. And I know it's also very important to my colleague, Minister Qualtrough. Our government is already committed to ensuring an accessible and barrier-free Canada by 2040, and we will continue to work alongside our partners to make this happen as soon as possible. On va continuer de travailler avec nos partenaires. For transportation services that are covered under federal laws and regulations, such as aircraft, trains, ferries, and intercity buses, plus the terminals and stations that serve them, we have legislations like the Accessible Canada Act that came into force in 2019, as well as regulations for accessible transportation. The Accessible Canada Act instructs services providers to identify, remove, and prevent barriers for persons with disabilities. It also provides tools for promoting and advancing accessibility, such as fines for not complying with the requirements. That being said, we all know that more can and must be done. Il reste du travail à faire. The Auditor General's report analyzed 3 independent organizations, but which Transport Canada is helping to acquire the resources and powers necessary to fulfill its mandates, namely the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority, or CATSA, who is responsible for security at our airports, Via Rail Canada, and the Canadian Transportation Agency, or CTA, which is a quasi-judicial tribunal. I know 3 organizations are also committed. I know that these 3 organizations are also committed to implementing the report's recommendations to make our transportation system even more accessible. In particular, I acknowledge the Auditor General's recommendation to increase consultation with persons with disabilities on how to improve their travel experience. The lived experience of persons with disabilities should be considered more when designing websites for planning and booking trips, selling tickets, and building new infrastructure. Another recommendation is also to better analyze the data to have a complete picture of the situation and see if there are systemic problems that we must address as soon as possible. This will help better identify current barriers and prevent future ones. So in conclusion, I want to thank the Office of the Auditor General for their work in preparing this report. It is extremely important and will help inform our ongoing work. And I look forward to continue working with CATSA, Via Rail, the CTA, and other agencies on next steps to further identify, remove, and prevent barriers that affect accessibility. Merci. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I, too, would like to thank the Auditor General of Canada for the report on rural and remote connectivity. I, too, met with her last week as well, and we accept the recommendations in the report. We know that high-speed internet connectivity and mobile connectivity is essential for Canadians, no matter where you live. And I'm proud to be part of a government that prioritizes investing in rural Canadians. In 2014, friends, only 79% of households had access to high-speed internet, which was the easiest to connect, by the way. It's easier to connect those 79 first percent. We're working on the harder parts. Today, thanks to our investments, our government has made 93.5% of Canadian households have access to affordable, reliable internet. The $3.2 billion Universal Broadband Fund, or the UBF as we call it, has already connected over 200,000 underserved homes to high-speed internet, with an additional 80,000 homes getting connected by the end of this year. And we have committed billions of dollars in programs through partnerships with provinces and territories. Since 2015, nearly 2.2 million Canadian households have received access to better, faster internet connectivity. We're well on our way to surpass our goal of 98% of homes by 2026. This will be achieved by continuing to work with our provincial, territorial, Indigenous, and community partners, as well as large and small internet service providers from coast to coast to coast. Our government has also committed $50 million for mobile projects that benefit the Indigenous communities. That includes working with British Columbia to connect the highway of tiers to make this highway safer for all travelers, especially Indigenous women and girls. Since 2015, we have made available $7.6 billion through various government programs to high-speed internet access for underserved areas. Friends, this is 10 times more funding than all previous governments combined. And I know that times are tough for many Canadians, so we have prioritized projects through the Universal Broadband Fund to keep prices down. Recently, our government issued a policy direction to the CRTC with an emphasis on competition and affordability. We have also expanded the Connecting Families initiative, which offers $20 a month internet to low-income families and seniors. And another thing to note, this report only covers the time period up to 2021. As Minister, I'm proud of the progress we've made since 2021 in connecting rural, remote, and Indigenous communities to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. Since 2021, the total number of households connected in rural Canada went from the low 60s to now nearly 70%. In 2014, the percentage of Indigenous households was less than 27%, and today we've increased by over 5% since 2021 alone, and now our programs have increased the percentage of Indigenous households to nearly 50%. There are major improvements since 2021 under very difficult circumstances such as unpredictable weather, causing delays at construction, and of course the pandemic. With all of that in mind, we're still on track to achieve our connectivity goals. Our investments in connectivity have made a real difference in people's lives from coast to coast to coast. And I'm proud to be part of a government who really knows the importance of rural and remote communities. Thank you very much.
Minister, the AG also found that high-speed internet and mobile phone connectivity in rural and First Nation communities is not adequate, calling what exists now a digital divide. What more would you like to see the government do on this front?
As I've said, in 2014, there was 79% of the country connected. We are at 93.5% now. We are underway to exceed our goals of 98% by 2026. That includes every community from coast to coast to coast, Minister, Indigenous as well.
Minister, what will happen with the unspent allocations? Are these going to be put into other programming, or is there a new timeline for the unspent billion in funding?
So it depends on how you keep track of the funding. We count funding as awarded as spent, okay? So it's the same as if you go to the grocery store and buy a new table or chairs or a new appliance. You've committed that money on your credit card. We have committed nearly every cent of the Universal Broadband Fund. The money doesn't roll out the day it's committed. Some of these projects are tens of millions of dollars. We're being responsible for taxpayers' money, and we roll the money out when they return the receipts to us, and the department keeps on track that they're progressing along as required. We're not giving the money up front. So the money is committed, even though it's not spent today. Most of that fund is committed.
Minister, what's the government doing to address connectivity on First Nations and even like the gap we see among First Nations communities? Just using BC as an example, we've got 40% of communities connected, whereas in Saskatchewan and Manitoba it's 10 and 15 respectively.
So as I said, we've come a long way. The Indigenous communities were 27%. We're now at 50%. I was in Saskatchewan last week and made a major broadband announcement of $37 million. Most of that funding was to connect rural Indigenous communities in northern Saskatchewan. We have partnerships with Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, BC, Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island. That makes our money go further. We're leveraging money to get everyone connected. In our plan, like I said earlier, it is to connect every community, Indigenous, remote, rural. We will get the job done.
Minister Alghabra, if you'll take a question.
Did the other ministers finish their remarks?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and I'm pleased to appear alongside Ministers Alghabra, Hutchings and Sajjan today. I want to thank the Auditor General and her team for their valuable work reporting on the progress being made in the historic rehabilitation of Centre Block. Once restored, it will be a model for sustainability and an inclusive and accessible space for all Canadians. We anticipate creating more than 70,000 jobs over the course of the project to restore and modernize Canada's parliamentary precinct, with over 90% of the work flowing to small and medium enterprises across Canada. D'une ampleur et d'une complexité considérable, ce projet de réhabilitation du patrimoine est le plus vaste et le plus complexe jamais entrepris au Canada. Il ne fait aucun doute qu'une entreprise d'une telle ampleur nécessite beaucoup de temps et d'investissement public. Je suis donc heureuse de voir que la vérificatrice générale a remarqué certains de nos beaux coups. Notamment, la vérificatrice générale a constaté que le ministère avait bien géré les coûts et la portée du projet jusqu'à présent et qu'il avait respecté les délais d'exécution prévus malgré les défis posés par la pandémie. Today's report also recognizes our efforts to collaborate with stakeholders, including Indigenous partners and experts, to rehabilitate this heritage masterpiece on behalf of Parliament and all Canadians. The report also observed that while considerable efforts have been made to strengthen governance, some issues do remain. I can tell you we're committed to implementing the Auditor General's recommendation to further improve project governance. Je suis extrêmement fière du travail accompli par mon ministère pour mener à bien ce projet important. Une fois encore, je remercie la vérificatrice générale de l'avoir salué. L'édifice du centre représente le Canada et ses valeurs. Une fois restauré et modernisé, ce chef-d'œuvre emblématique pourra continuer de servir les générations à venir de Canadiens et de Canadiennes. Merci.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I, too, want to welcome the Auditor General's report and accept the recommendations. We at Global Affairs Canada are already working towards the results and the findings. All of us benefit from this rigorous analysis on how we can strengthen our work. Our government's Feminist international assistance policy is bold, groundbreaking, and transformational. Since its inception in 2017, we have funded over 1,800 small women's rights organizations through Women's Voice and Leadership. We have made historic investments in paid and unpaid care, and we have pioneered investments in gender equality through the Equality Fund. And today, Canada is a top donor in gender-specific programming. And now I'd like to talk about the three findings in the report. First, the report has underlined that we must modernize and strengthen our reporting results, which I absolutely agree. Now, improving our reporting is imperative for transparency, accountability, and also for decision-making. In fact, improving project management and reporting system is already underway. We're working closely with our partners to develop these systems, and we will invest in robust training as we move forward. The Auditor General's report also stressed how the Department must improve how we report on the broader impact of Canada's gender equality projects, and we must do better on this. As Minister of International Development, I have seen the results of our Feminist international policy around the world firsthand. For example, when I was in Bangladesh, I visited one of the slums there and learned about how Canadian funding is supporting menstrual health education. Also working with the United Nations Population Fund, our efforts are reducing cultural stigma around using feminine hygiene product. Now this means we are supporting girls to stay in school and reducing barriers for women to work. I also have seen how Canadian partners are working to advance gender equality through their projects. In Mali, for example, the Coldwater International is helping adolescent girls access quality education and also to stay in school. They're also strengthening the capacity of the Ministry of Education to sustain quality educational programs. Now, ultimately, the project aims to make education better and more accessible for 16,000 girls in Mali. Now, these are just two examples of how Canada's assistance advances gender equality. In short, we know that our international assistance under FIEP has improved the lives of people in the countries where we work, and I've witnessed this myself. And we must improve the way we communicate, aggregate our long-term impacts of these projects, though. Then that way, we will be able to do a better job at telling the larger story of Canada's efforts to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals over time. And the second issue I'd like to address is the progress towards the percentage targets set out in our Feminist International Assistance Policy. Since the policy launched in 2017, the COVID-19, climate crisis, and increasing conflicts and displacement have ramped up needs and also raised the stakes. So I want to stress, through it all, Canada's commitment to gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls has not wavered at all. Last year alone, a full 99% of Canada's international assistance either targeted or integrated gender equality. And we will ensure that gender equality is woven into all our work. Now, Canada leads the world in the share of how our international assistance that contributes to advancing gender equality and the empowering of women and girls in all their diversity. And then that phrase, the women and girls in all their diversity, is also an important one for us at Global Affairs Canada, and which includes our feminist approach. It brings me to the last report finding that I'd like to discuss and how we are working to better consider intersectionality in our work. Now, by that, characteristics of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and more, these characteristics overlap and intersect to form who we are, and they can heighten discrimination, marginalization, and also vulnerability. These factors do form a key part of our project analysis, but as the report noted, Global Affairs Canada has more work to do to fully consider intersectionality in our programming. And this is something that we are engaged on and will continue to improve. And I will also close by noting that when I read the report, it reiterated the urgency and the importance of many of the improvements that we're trying to make at Global Affairs Canada. We will be working tirelessly with our international partners to promote gender equality and inclusivity. We firmly believe that supporting gender equality is the best way to build a more peaceful and inclusive and more prosperous world. So I look forward to our continued work and strengthening our practices as we continue with FIA. Thank you so much.
Do you take responsibility personally for your department not knowing if the feminist policy works?
Well, first of all, when I was briefed on the Auditor General's report, in terms of the work that is being done, I have visited a lot of the projects. And have spoken with a lot of the organizations that actually are delivering the projects to see firsthand what are the actual results, what are the outcomes. What we need to do better at, as the Auditor General has pointed out, is be able to gather this work. What we need to do is making sure that we have a better reporting process, better way of tracking projects to move forward. And this is something
you don't know if girls go to school more often in the project you found. This is one of the aspects. You just have no idea.
No, as I stated, in fact, actually, this is one of the reasons why I should go visit those projects. The information.
While visiting, you know if girls go to school more often.
Sorry?
While visiting those places,
okay, if you want to talk about when it comes to this, right? For example, visiting some of the projects, the information is there. What we need to do is be able to aggregate and get that information where we need to improve. That's what the Auditor General has noted. The information is actually within with our partners, and we do have that. What we have been able to do is bring it together for senior leaders. Is something that we will improve. So, for example, when you talk about girls going to school and how we're trying to improve the lives of having better hygiene products, making sure that their washrooms accessible for women, so more girls can go to school. Some of the projects that I have visited, like for example in Senegal where I've visited the project, we've been able to show exactly what the percentages are. What we have been able to do is actually get that information back to be able to present the fuller story. But now going further though, we need to go even further than this. Because when I talk about girls going to school, that has been one issue that needs to be addressed. But as we look around the world, early childhood forced marriage is also another issue. So when you look at the issues within Bangladesh or other countries within Africa and other places, we also have to address that as well. So we don't want to just look at those things. So that's one of the reasons why I had a very thorough discussion with the Auditor General to take a look at
on former employees' computers. This is what the Auditor General is saying.
And that's one of the reasons why we actually don't have an information management system, something that we're working towards.
Why does this issue persist 2 years after it was flagged internally?
This is one of this is something that the department has started working on, and this is one of the reasons that we're going to be moving towards looking at not only information system, but looking at how we can actually look and report on the results, making sure that the outcomes are also measured so that we can make better decisions.
You don't actually have an explanation for why the problem still persists 2 years after this.
So when I came over as Minister of International Development, this is one of the reasons why we actually looked at what type of system do we need to put into place. The interim project was put into place for a better information management system. This is something that we'll be diving into as a department to making sure that this gets done now.
The AG is saying that bilateral funding has been diverted to Ukraine and COVID needs. How much money has actually gone to Ukraine away from Africa?
So first of all, I want to make it very clear. In fact, actually, we have not taken any funding that would have gone to other places. In fact, if you recall, in last year we had an off-cycle budget. No, we looked at the denominator changes because we had to put more funding into Ukraine and also because of COVID. However, our funding into Africa also actually increased. So for example, the off-cycle budget request on food security that we launched, of that 50 million we actually put towards Ukraine, but the 200 million was actually put towards throughout that region.
A quick word on the professionalism of GAC executives. They're targeted in the report, not following through.
Yeah, so I actually had a very good discussion with the Auditor General about this, and one thing I assured her when it comes to the Auditor General's work that they do, that every employee will be taking it very seriously. But in terms of, I want to make this very clear, I purposely go visit the project to see how projects are being implemented, also to see the work that our global affairs employee. And one thing that I have found, that everybody who is in the development sector at Global Affairs Canada, who are firmly believes in the feminist approach. More importantly, and the reason why, if you let me hear me out, please. To the work that is being done. Now, Germany has also launched their feminist international assistance policy just 2 weeks ago. Other nations haven't launched their own policy, but they're using our example. Well, what I'm trying to say here is this is a transformative, very bold approach that we're doing. What we need to do is be able to gather our data better, have a better information management system so that we can show the results and the outcomes of what is actually taking place in the field. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You have the right person. There will be no change at all in
If you don't mind, Minister Alghabra, given the lofty goals of the Accessible Canada Act, will the committee hire more people to hold service providers to these transportation accessibility regulations?
Yeah, look, we are committed. Canadians know how committed our government is to ensuring that we continue to tackle barriers that persons with disabilities face across society, certainly within the transportation sector. And you saw my announcement a couple of weeks ago to provide the Canadian Transportation Agency with additional $76 million so they can beef up their resources. So yes, I expect that the CTA will be able to shore up the amount of resources dedicated to tackling and investigating issues of complaints when it comes to accessibility.
On the accessibility front, we see over the winter time we saw lots of issues with wheelchairs being damaged that we see still coming up. You and Minister Qualtrough met with airline execs. Like, when can we expect to see improvement on this front? And are we still going to see wheelchairs treated just as normal luggage when it comes to compensation?
Look, every time I read about or hear about a story like this, I get really frustrated. The airlines have requirements. Our regulation was explicit in requiring airlines not only to have policies, but to implement these policies to accommodate people and persons with disabilities, including their wheelchairs. So every time I hear of a story like this, I get frustrated, and I want to acknowledge each story has its own unique circumstances, but I expect the airlines to abide by our regulation. I expect the airlines to comply with the law, and I expect the CTA to enforce these laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off.